Well, folks, we have some interesting news to talk about today. We have some brand new footage, I think one of the most exciting pieces of footage we've actually had from Mario Kart World in some time. We also have an update on a story I covered yesterday that, look, guys, I'll just be honest. I made a mistake. I messed up, and it happens. And we're here to correct the record on that and have an honest conversation about it. We also have this news story breaking out there. It's still developing, and it's going to be developing, in my estimation, for years, about the ability to hack a Switch 2. That is right. You guys knew with Switch 2s out in the wild and some people getting their hands on it a bit nefariously, that other nefarious activities were going to begin, such as the Switch hacking scene was going to start taking a crack at Switch 2. And needless to say, things are not going very well for the hacking scene. And Nintendo has put a ton of protections in place that they've never had before. Now, hackers tend to take that as a challenge, and that might just make them work even harder to try to hack a Switch 2. But it could be some time before we need to worry about games leaking on the internet. But also, for some of you guys, before you'll be able to do modifications like to your Switch 2 without worry of your system getting bricked. Because yes, there are people attempting to hack Switch 2 right now that their systems are already bricked without ever touching Nintendo's servers. How? Oh, we're going to talk about it because Nintendo has some pretty clever tricks up their sleeve to try to dissuade people from hacking the Switch and ultimately dumping games, because that's what Nintendo cares about most. That being said, before we dive into this, I want to remind you we are giving away 5 copies of Donkey Kong Bonanza right now. And I say right now, it doesn't come out till July 17th, but you know, between now and July 17th, to win one of those 5 copies, you just got to go down to the link in the description or the pinned comment. I wish everybody luck, and let's get into our first story. And again, this is that Mario Kart footage I was talking about. We have another P-Switch mission, but this one takes place in the ocean. It's 1080p, as I said, yeah, it's set at the 1080p. That's really cool that we actually have a higher quality video file here. It comes from Nintendo Today, but I want to take a listen to this because, my lord, do I love the wave race vibes, man. That's what I get in this one, wave race vibes. Let's watch this P-Switch mission right now. Oh man, I seriously, the wave race vibes are big on this one. Oh man, I really was feeling it when they got to that second section with the big waves coming in. I'm like, oh man, this game's gonna be incredible when you're actually in a real race with 24 players and the big waves hit and you got the jet ski action going on. Oh man, I can't wait. I can't wait for June 5th to play some Mario Kart. There's also some new features coming that are kind of already out thanks to Nintendo Switch 2 and updates coming. And part of this is how to manage your friends on your Switch 2 or Switch via the phone. So we go over here with a post from Stealth40K who says, on Switch 2, you can manage your friends list from your phone via the Switch app. This was also on the Nintendo Today app. And it says, you can add friends either with friend codes or QR codes on the mobile app if you so choose. Now, we've been able to technically do something similar to this for a little bit on the app already. They just made it a lot more convenient. And so you can just kind of see the process here of tap down here. There you go. You tap that person. You can make them your best friend here, notify when this friend comes online so you get a notification on your phone. That's pretty neat. I don't remember us being able to do that before. I believe that is new. You can go over here and you can add your friend. You can use a friend code, a QR code. You can see your received friend request. Being able to manage all of this from your phone, to me, is much more convenient than it is currently on Switch. I don't really like the way the Switch manages the friends list. So personally, they actually found a way for me to use their Nintendo Switch Online app because Again, I never really used it a whole lot before, but being able to manage all of my friends' stuff from it, to me, is a really big deal. Again, it just makes things simpler for me. Now, we got to revisit another story that also came from Stealth40K. that we reported on yesterday, because as many people pointed out in the comments, and as much deserved as I do deserve the criticism that was coming from this, I misinterpreted a story and didn't use my own eyes, or at least my eyes overlooked some stuff, because in the end, I'm not perfect. I am human and I do make mistakes. And this was a mistake on my end. And my entire conversation I had about this topic yesterday was wrong. And I got to own that. I'm sorry. But let's talk about what I messed up with. This story we talked about yesterday, where it says the Switch 2 logo isn't included in the Summer Game Fest partner list because third parties are announcing Switch 2 games. Switch games were announced last year without a Switch logo. Nintendo is involved. Could be a direct ad or something else. We don't know. I interpreted this initial words as, because you can look here on the list, you don't see Nintendo Switch 2 on this list, right? So I interpreted this originally when I read this as, oh, the Switch 2 logo isn't on this section of the partners, so Nintendo isn't going to be showing a game trailer. But the thing is, they are. It's right here. Fifth row down on the right, the Switch 2 logo is right there. So this literally is showing the same list that we saw the other day from Summer Game Fest. What he is saying here is the Switch 2 logo isn't included on the Summer Game Fest list because third party. So he's saying it has nothing to do with third party announcements is what he's trying to say. I interpreted those words incorrectly, so I do deeply apologize. It does look like we still should be pretty hyped for Summer Game Fest because Nintendo will likely show something. So I retract the story yesterday. I stick with the one from a couple days ago. This isn't even a new partner list. This is just the same list in a different form on their website. So I apologize. Again, I make mistakes. Nintendo is likely going to be showing something at Summer Game Fest. So I'm really excited about it. And I do have to apologize. I do make mistakes. Yesterday I had like 12 to 15 stories, and I usually do better than that. I need to do better. So I will try to do better moving forward. I'm sure I'll make other mistakes in the future, not intentionally, but I think it's important to own your mistakes when you do make them. So I do apologize. If anyone felt misled yesterday or confused what I was talking about, as the Switch 2 logo is right there in the image. Anyways, let's go to this news story, and this deals with the hacking scene with Nintendo and the Switch 2. So let's go over here. It says, if true, Nintendo took it very serious to make Nintendo Switch 2 extremely hard to hack. It's going to be many, many years before this gets cracked, at least 2, maybe longer. Game leaks online via game dumps is going to be a long ways off. In my honest opinion, this is good news for general consumers. It will be hacked one day, but Nintendo went all out so far to make it very difficult to do it. It's based on this post here from the Switch 2 Hacks subreddit, which of course, a Switch 2 Hacks subreddit exists because a Switch Hacks subreddit exists. And they're quoting this stuff here that comes from GBA Temp. So I thought we should go to the source. And the source is GBA Temp. If you guys don't know, GBA Temp is a well-known place for the hacking community around Nintendo. So this stuff is pretty well vetted. And it comes from Lugana Lore 88, aka a well-known member. You know, is what it is. This person does seem to know what they're talking about, and people seem to be kind of confirming that this stuff is happening. So here's what the post says. Some hackers got their hands on Switch 2. One, a MIG switch tested, and it immediately locks out the Switch 2, turning it into a brick as it ends up boot looping. So just with that alone, for anyone out there that has a MIG switch and isn't using it for nefarious reasons, instead, you use it as a way to condense your physical library, just know, do not insert that MIG switch in a Switch 2. It's going to boot loop. Nintendo Switch 2 can recognize it's a MIG switch and will brick your system. This is very good to note for people that have MIG switches that aren't using them for nefarious reasons, that yes, please don't do that, okay? Next up, testers that prod the flash storage of the ROM chip immediately locks out the Switch 2. So, hey, I'm trying to prod the actual memory inside, right? We're trying to go directly to the hard drive and circumvent Nintendo's protections and inject our own code. Yeah, the moment you prod it, you're locked out and bricked. That's right. Don't think you can go around messing with that chip, at least not right now. The Switch 2 detects have some weird protection that it can detect voltage changes that tools cause when scanning the chips, even when it's minor. So that's the one that has some people freaking out a little bit because, man, just a minor voltage detection can make your system get bricked. What they're missing out on there is scanning the chips. It is not something where you take like a multimeter tool. Let's just use this as an example here on the microphone. And you touch a trace here, and then you touch a trace way over here just to see if there's a voltage running through. Now, multimeter tools will have its own little mini current because it is an electrical tool, but they're not talking about that. They're talking about specifically it could detect voltage changes when scanning the chips themselves, not touching different traces on the board. This is important because trace touching is part of repair work. So to know if you got to replace a transistor, to know if you got to replace an entire module, you often have to test traces to see if power is flowing through those traces at the right amps and voltage. And people are worried that this would just kill repair. But in the end, we got to remember, what does it say? This was talking about tools caused for scanning the chips themselves, even when it's minor. You don't use those kind of tools typically in console repair. I'm not saying it's unheard of and impossible to have those tools used when you're repairing consoles, but it's pretty rare. Usually, if you're having an issue like with let's say the little reader for cartridges. Oh, I can't read switch cartridges. You would just replace the reader, right? You wouldn't even need to scan it. You would just know there's an issue. Oh, the flash memory is a problem. You would just replace the flash memory. Now, you couldn't really replace it on Switch because it was directly tied to the board. So that's a whole different thing. You couldn't even do that on Switch. So that probably isn't going to be necessarily repairable on Switch 2 without sending it directly to Nintendo. But anyways, I just wanted to point out that just because it could detect voltage changes and brick your Switch, that has to do specifically with scanning chips. Not just, oh my God, the magnets got too charged when they attached to the system and now my system is bricked. Or, oh no, I dropped my system and maybe it had a little power surge from the battery when it hit the ground. Oh no, my system's, oh no, I had a power surge from the outlet. They're not talking about that. Okay, this is very specific to tools used for scanning chips, which is a common method used to create mod chips. So this is Nintendo's way of combating mod chips. All right. Now we get into here. Unless an exploit is found that doesn't result into a brick when implemented, it won't happen in a long time. Again, this isn't my words, right? I had the words of, hey, two years or more. They're saying a long time, whatever that means. Now, I know 3 testers that were working on hardware and software modding and know what they were doing just to find that any work immediately bricks it. Nintendo gave a troubleshooting step to reload the firmware from the SD card, but it's stuck in boot looping. It's almost like Nintendo knows they're trying to modify the system. In the end, it had to return to Nintendo, and they are no longer allowed to be testers and had to pay for the console. Otherwise, it will go to small claims court as it has some form of internal reporting that unauthorized use was made. Apparently, another tester had early access to a game, and it crashed and rebooted, but no longer worked until a reinstall of firmware, so it may be a sign that an exploit that triggers a reboot to run unsigned code is out of the question, as the firmware will refuse to run and needs a clean firmware. Also, for your information, reinstalling firmware from SD card is not offline. It is a generic app that only connects to a Nintendo server to get the latest firmware, meaning it doesn't allow to install specific firmware versions and no longer can be used as a workaround. That's right, Nintendo made it so you have to connect to their servers to install their firmware. Smart move, Nintendo. Best bet is to hope for an emulator and a way to dump Switch 2 ROMs. But what they're saying here is the best bet is someday there will be a separate way to dump games off Switch 2 cartridges. The MiG Switch, as an example, comes with a Kart dumper. That Kart dumper is independent of the Nintendo Switch, and you can dump your games through that Kart dumper to an SD card and put it on your computer. So there still could be a way someday to dump Switch 2 games to the internet and obviously emulate them. But it's looking like it's going to be extremely hard to basically modify your Switch 2. Now, impossible? No, there's no such thing as things being impossible. Nintendo Switch 2s will be hacked one day. It's going to happen. Maybe it happens within a year. Maybe it happens within 6 months. I think it's going to be 2 years or more. This reminds me of the PlayStation 5, where there was some headway made a year in and a little bit more progress 2 years in, but it really wasn't until the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024 that PlayStation 5 ended up finally being completely jailbroken. That's right. As of right now in 2025, yes, the PlayStation 5 is completely jailbroken and can be modified, but it took 3 years. Let's just put that 3 years for them to get through all of Sony's protections in order to do that. Nintendo has put in a ton of protections themselves. Some of Sony's protections, by the way, also bricked PlayStation 5s. So people that dealt with that are already have seen stuff like this before. So this sounds scary. Oh my God, every time they try to modify, it's bricking the system. For your average consumer, we're not modifying systems, so we have nothing to worry about. It's not just going to brick itself through just normal use case. These are people legitimately trying to modify and hack the system, and Nintendo's bricking it. They told us they were going to do it, and they're even doing it without ever touching Nintendo's servers. Why? Because they put in protections against all the common methods used to hack a Switch. It's almost like Nintendo had this bounty up for like the last X amount of years where they were paying hackers $10,000 a pop for finding exploits on Switch. Why were they doing that? Exactly so they could create the protections they have now on Switch 2. Now, I talked about how, in my opinion, I do think this is good for general consumers. Not all consumers. I want to be very clear here. General consumers are not the same as all consumers. People who modify their systems, I would not call them general consumers. People who like to modify their systems, custom themes, mods in games, run their systems at higher clock rates, dump their games, emulate. All the people that do that kind of stuff like to run homebrew. You are not a general consumer. You're a very specific niche consumer of a market of modifiers and hackers. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I'm fully in support of your ability to do that. A general consumer is more like a random person who doesn't do any of this stuff, who just buys the games, who logged onto X, logged onto Facebook, logged onto TikTok, or whatever their favorite social media is, and they got spoiled from a game. Because, guys, not everyone who modifies their systems are nefarious actors, and that's why I'm not like anti-modification or anything. However, the moment the system is hacked is the moment games can be dumped, and games getting dumped is how game leaks happen. And we just went through a whole generation where every single Switch game leaked to the internet 1 to 2 weeks ahead of time, and thus unintended, unwanted spoilers would end up on all these various social medias. And thanks to the algorithms, like if you're someone who was watching all of Nintendo's latest news for Tears of the Kingdom, the algorithm could have fed you something that was leaked from the actual game dump online, and you could have got spoiled about major plot points and other things dealing with Tears of the Kingdom before it was even available to play in a public way legally. So I do think that this is generally good for general consumers, that they're not going to have to worry about dealing with game leaks pre-launch for quite some time. And I think that's the win we're talking about here with general consumers. Yes, games like Legends EA, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, Tamagotchi Life, those games still coming to Switch 1 will absolutely still have those issues. But any Switch 2 exclusive games, it's going to be a while before those game dumps are online and emulated in a way where these leaks are going to exist. So when I say this is good for general consumers, most consumers don't modify their systems. Those are the consumers we're talking about using social media and getting spoiled unintentionally. So I'm not talking about people that intentionally click on leak videos intentionally, but I'm talking about people that like literally didn't want to see any of it and it ended up in their timeline anyways, and we kept having to make videos and social posts warning people it's time to start blocking words related to these games so you don't get spoiled. It's going to be nice if I don't have to do that for a couple of years. Now, will it take a couple of years before the system's hacked? I don't know. Is it going to take a couple of years for a hacker or somebody to figure out how to dump games off a Switch 2 cartridge and make a Switch 2 cartridge dumper? That I don't know, because the cartridges are going to have their own protections. And right now, that wasn't the initial route that was being taken. The initial route being taken was, let's find a way to modify the system, because it's usually quicker to modify the system than it is to find a way to do dumps of a game off a disc and or cartridge. But in the end, this is where we sit today. A cartridge dumper will exist one day, but they're going to keep trying to modify, and they're going to keep getting the systems bricked. They're going to keep trying to find a way around those bricks, because right now you can't even put the firmware back on because you got to connect to Nintendo servers for it, and Nintendo servers could tell you were fucking with the system, and so they just bricked it, and they're not going to let you install. So look, Nintendo is they were obviously going to crack down after what happened with Switch. It was pretty bad. We're talking like PlayStation Vita, PlayStation Portable levels of bad with the hacking going on, but not quite that level of bad in terms of game sales and all that, right? They were able to be more successful than ever despite this stuff, but it definitely, general consumers, a lot of them, and I was there for a whole generation covering this stuff, a lot of general consumers are definitely very upset over game leaks. So that's why I do say I think this is good for the general consumer, but not necessarily all consumers. And I'm not anti-modification. just know you probably will get to mod your Switch one day. It's probably, or Switch 2. It just might be some years from now. Anyways, folks, I am Nathaniel Robojans from Nintendo Prime. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. And you know what? I'll catch you in the next video.